President Cyril Ramaphosa speaking a short time ago, declaring or announcing the national lockdown of 21 days at the Union buildings. Let's go straight to the capital then, bring in ENCA political editor Vuyo Mvoko, who's standing by for us. So Vuyo, first, it was rumoured, then denied. Now this lockdown is official.
Indeed, that was the case throughout the day, and I mean, we've been having these conversations with our colleague and resident analyst Karima Brown for the whole day, and we did indeed come to that conclusion much earlier in the day, because it was really the only road that the president could take, because a national lockdown of the nature he just announced is really the only a position that he could take between the national disaster, which is where we are, and a full-on state of emergency. Let's talk, of course, about what this all means. Let me bring you in here, Karima Brown. It wasn't the only route that the president could take, wasn't it?
Absolutely, Vuyo. I think the president showed enormous leadership today, and South Africa has shown him a lot of patience. He met with all the role players, and if you look at the comprehensive nature of the lockdown and what it entails, from every South African who is not an essential worker staying at home for 21 days to the kind of support that business is supposed to give workers, you will see that that consultation was in fact necessary. A raft of measures introduced, starting of course with the fact that people are going to have to be staying at home, and it is compulsory. The army will be assisting the police. There will be lockdowns throughout the country, and of course this is going to affect businesses, and he outlined quite a few measures that is to mitigate the situation. Ministers will meet at 10 o'clock as we did last week to brief all the different sectors as to the specificities of the provisions that have been made.
Let's go through a few of them very briefly, even if it's just to recap. Let's start with the most vulnerable, including the homeless. Measures there that the government is going to put in place to make sure that they too aren't overlooked or neglected.
Absolutely, Vuyo. As I was saying earlier in the day, we saw when the army moved into a place like Craigwell in Johannesburg, the homeless were already rounded up, hawkers were already rounded up, and the president has made social solidarity a central theme of this plan, and very aware that government alone cannot possibly do it. So there's a huge push for all participating social partners, from the churches, religious organizations, to the private medical sector, as well as big business, to come to the party. So we're expecting special buildings to be set aside for these people. We're also looking at water and sanitation facilities. We know that many of our communities are without it. So these are all going to kick in this period. And then, of course, the president has warned against bulk buying and panic buying, saying that supplies are in fact secure and will be kept open. But I think that it's going to be very difficult to actually go out. We will see tomorrow what the minister says about when people can go out, and of course which shops they can visit. Normally under a lockdown, it's normally grocery shops and pharmacies. Then there's also quite a lot of initiatives around small businesses. The president has said that there is a relief fund, and there's also a fund where people can be retrained. Businesses are exempted from paying their stipend toward the skill fund, the unemployment insurance fund. There is relief for employers as well as employees. But I think for me what stood out here was the call from the president on the business sector to not let this burden fall on the working poor in South Africa and those who are destitute.
And they do agree with him. I mean, I was here a couple of days ago, and yesterday, as we were standing right here, and the business people came forward to say we are actually fully fully behind what the government has done up until now, and we will back them in what they are going to do next. So extensive consultations were made. I mean, CEOs of the major South African banks were part of that conversation, as well as CEOs of other financial institutions.
Absolutely. In fact, the President made a special call on banks. He said that the Competitions Commission rules on banks will be relaxed. So we're expecting the banking sector to make announcements. We've seen some of the banks already coming to the party with small businesses. I'm looking specifically at the issue around bond holidays. There's also some tax relief for businesses. And I think that those are going to be really impactful, especially once those measures start having implications for people who rent businesses, particularly people in the hospitality industry. The service sector in South Africa is a massive area in terms of growth, both from a tourist perspective as well as a hospitality perspective. And they're the measures that are going to be rolled out specifically through the Industrial Development Corporation, the IDC, which is, of course, also under the leadership of the Trade and Industry Minister, Ibrahim Patel. He was here a few days ago speaking to you, Vuyo, and I think that those measures are now going to come into effect. The one thing also that I think is important to realize is as our movements get restricted, that it is very clear that it is about saving lives. It's about also testing. One of the things about stopping the movement of people is to allow the state to actually move in with testing facilities. And I think that, in terms of pushing the virus back, is going to be the next big step. We have to upscale testing. Today we saw the numbers rise to 402. And of course the amount of testing has now gone up to something like 9,000. We need that to go a lot faster. And more importantly, we need to get the results of those test packs a lot quicker so that people can actually see whether they are safe and whether we've been able to curb the spread of the virus. So I think from a health strategy point of view, that in the next few weeks is going to be absolutely critical. Putting the country on pause, allowing for maximum and upscaling tests and fast-tracking those results is for me the most immediate objective that needs to be reached by the health authorities, in conjunction, of course, with very senior civil society participation as well as the private health sector. The President also spoke about the Oppenheimer Fund and also this important fund that's going to be chaired by Gloria Sarobi and Mr. Enthoven. And I think those details we will get more of tomorrow, but a genuine set of comprehensive measures ranging from testing right down to making sure that the most vulnerable homeless people on the streets are taken care of. So the next few days is going to be critical, and all of us will have to make do with what we can and also play our part in trying to stop this virus from spreading.
In fact, one of the things the President said right at the beginning was that you don't want to get to a situation where our health facilities will be pushed to limits that they cannot actually handle. But speaking of social partners, COSATU did say earlier today that they would be opposed to a lockdown. One wonders whether, in fact, the raft of measures the President just announced will sort of persuade them to actually, fall in line or support the range of measures that the President just announced.
Well, what we've seen before the President spoke was also a massive push by civil society organizations coming together, putting forward the issues of poor people, working people, and workers in general. And among the things that they have put on their list of demands have in fact been incorporated into the President's announcement to the nation this evening, particularly around things like sanitation, the issue of retrenchments. The President spoke about people who contract this disease when they are at work, that companies need to step forward. So a lot of the fears of working people expressed by labour federations such as COSATU and SAFTU actually contained in those measures. But I think the devil is going to be in the detail, Vuyo. I think tomorrow's press conference at 10 o'clock, where the different ministries are actually going to outline the measures, is going to be of utmost importance. We've already seen public sector unions such as NEHAO, the Minister of Police, admitting that we don't have enough protective gear for frontline people. Or our police stations in the country, for example, do not have the necessary protective gear that they require. So there's also going to have to be repurposing of our industries to produce things like masks, protective gear, gloves, and we've already seen globally that the developed countries have bulk buyed everything out. We've gotten a fantastic donation from Jack Ma, the Chinese business person who made the donation to Africa. We need to track where that equipment is going, but I can foresee that our textile industries, our manufacturers, we've got a great plastics sector in our country, we've got pesticide companies that can come to the party, and you're going to now see people having to do national duty from industry side to make up for the shortages that exist globally, because we are competing with the likes of England, with France, with everybody for this equipment. So we will really have to look internally and harness the resources that we have here to meet some of the requirements in terms of testing and protective gear for people.
In fact, you're spot on, because I do understand that getting the state security agencies and getting the army and more police involved, part of the reason even though it was contemplated initially, but it could not really be part of the package that the president announced last week, was precisely because, of problems with their state of readiness, and including, of course, whether they will get the things, masks and other things that they would need in the course of doing their job. But lastly, perhaps, on the question of, civil society cooperation, the president has met with political parties. He has met with religious leaders. He is going to meet with trade unions. That meeting was scheduled for tomorrow, and later on with traditional leaders. How important is it for him to get them behind this move? Because even if you send the army and more police, into townships and other densely populated areas, you still need voluntary cooperation from civil society.
Absolutely, Vuyo. If you look particularly at our informal sector, we've got hordes of traders, we've got small traders, we've got, in every major city, you can go to downtown in Tshwane, downtown in Johannesburg, in Cape Town, in Port Elizabeth, everywhere. You've got masses of people in the informal economy. They are loosely organized, so those groups of people also have to be brought in, as well as organized labor. So cooperation in places like the mining sector, where people work in very close conditions, where people literally breathe on each other's necks, there the precautions and the shutdown is going to be very, very important. And the question of paid leave is going to be a very sticky point. And I think that the leadership across the social compact is going to have to really kick in, because the president has shown the way. Government cannot do everything by itself. There are some things that employers and the workers will have to come to, and the state will obviously have to be the arbiter, and the Department of Labour is going to be absolutely critical here. Also the Department of Health, to make sure that workers in those sections are actually protected, that their rights are protected, and that they can take off. Companies are going to have to re-look the issue of sick leave. They're going to have to put people on short staff, going to make people work in different hours. So you're actually going to need the maximum amount of maturity from labour and business, and also you need leadership. You don't need brinkmanship at this point from any party. And of course, everybody has to put the national interest first. And the president made a special point about that it's not the time for sectoral interest here. We need to put the country first. And I would like to believe that we need to put people before profits at this stage.
Yeah, and that's where we're going to leave it for now. Tembegile, an important point to make here being that this is not a box-ticking exercise. This has to work if we are indeed going to be able to combat the spread of this disease as a nation, and it depends on each and every one of us. Tembegile?
ENCA political editor Vuyo Mvoko speaking to host of The Fix, also here on ENCA, Karima Brown. They are a team live outside the Union buildings in Pretoria. If you've missed it, we are covering this breaking news coming from their President Cyril Ramaphosa, announcing in the last half hour that a 21-day lockdown will begin at midnight on Thursday. I want to just quote for you some of what the President said in that address in making the announcement. He said, and I quote here, "It is essential that every person in the country adheres strictly and without exception to the regulations that have already been put in place and to the measures that I'm going to announce this evening," which he's done. The President goes on to say, "Our analysis of the progress of the epidemic informs us that we need to urgently and dramatically escalate our response," which is why we are here. So from Thursday, the 26th of March at midnight, only essential service workers will be allowed to leave their homes to make their trips to work. And if you are hoping to head out for medical reasons, for example, those are some of the conditions under which that you will be able to leave your house, because only essential movement by citizens will be allowed. South Africa now sitting at 402 cases of this new coronavirus. They're expected to rise by the hundreds.